I am here with the chairman just before he heads into that news conference to talk about Facebook's record settlement with the FTC. Chairman Simons, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Now, you have said that you want this settlement to change the culture within Facebook. How is it going to do that?
So what we're doing is we are imposing a system of belt and suspenders for order compliance. And what we're doing is we are creating 5 channels of overlapping compliance channels that are augmented with mandatory information flows into those channels for transparency and accountability, such that if one or more of the channels fails to notice a problem, it's likely that one of the other channels will see it and prevent the issue from becoming live.
So increasing transparency within the company, but there are also a lot of questions about the fine that Facebook would have to pay as part of this $5 billion. Some people say that's not big enough. This is just becoming a cost of doing business for these companies. How do you defend that?
Well, a couple of things. One is that we don't have the authority to fine Facebook ourselves. We'd have to go to court to do that. And it's very unlikely that if we went to court that we would get anything near $5 billion. So this is the choices we have, and we think this is a great result given our circumstances.
Should Mark Zuckerberg have been held personally accountable as part of the settlement?
I think Mark Zuckerberg is held personally accountable. He's signing the order. He's named specifically in the order. The order requires him personally to certify that that the company is in compliance with our order quarterly. And if he files false certifications, then he's subjecting himself to civil and criminal penalties.
You mentioned that the FTC doesn't have the authority to impose some of these penalties directly. It had to go through the DOJ. Do you think that means that the FTC should have enhanced authority or new powers in order to effectively regulate tech companies?
The problem isn't that we work with the DOJ. The problem is that we have to go to the court, and we'd have to convince a court to try to impose a penalty of this magnitude. And given the history of these types of cases, the chances that a court would impose a $5 billion penalty for something like this is very remote.
But down the road, do you think that the FTC should have that power to impose penalties on its own without having to go through the court system?
Well, that's something that's worth thinking about.
The other big question around Facebook is the number of violations that it has, that you guys are alleging that it committed. One of those violations occurred just 4 months after the previous settlement was agreed to back in 2012. So how do you assure consumers that these regulations and the settlement is actually going to be strong enough to make a difference?
Yeah, so this was a systematic failure within Facebook in terms of how they did compliance, and that's why we're imposing on them this belt and suspenders approach with these multiple overlapping channels of compliance.
But you did that previously back in 2012.
No, this is new.
These are stronger enhanced requirements.
So for now, Facebook is creating a new committee of the board that deals solely with privacy and has only independent directors on it. We have these certifications now that Mark Zuckerberg has to do personally. Also, the chief compliance officer is going to have to do them, subject to the same penalties. And then we've got a very beefed up independent third-party assessor that is basically going to conduct an audit of Facebook, and we will have control over the approval of that assessor, and we can fire the assessor. Plus, for us, we get a lot more insight into what they're doing through these mandatory flows of information, which we get ourselves, and we have much greater power to ask for whatever else we need to get from Facebook.
And what are some of those other things that you feel you might need to see from Facebook?
So one of the things that we are requiring Facebook to do is essentially create a privacy impact statement for every new or modified product, service, or practice that they plan to implement. So before they put any changes into effect, they have to do a privacy review, and we have access to that.
Can you also update us on the status of other FTC inquiries into Facebook? FTC is looking at antitrust very broadly. You guys have a new task force going on. So can you tell us whether or not Facebook might be swept up into that effort as well?
Yeah, so let me put it this way. I've said this before, is that the Technology Task Force is set up to look at big tech platforms because those are companies that have either market power, monopoly power, or at least potential for it. And so those are the places you look as an antitrust enforcer for your cases. You look in those situations. And so we set up a task force designed specifically to look at that. I can't talk about any individual cases because our investigations are non-public.
Well, final question for you. The DOJ did say yesterday that it's going to be launching its own broad antitrust review. Are you concerned about any regulatory overlap there?
Oh, not at all. They're doing essentially what we're doing. So we have this technology task force which focuses that, and they're doing something similar. And we always coordinate. We have a clearance process in place so that we don't duplicate what each other are doing.
Great. Thank you so much, Chairman. I really appreciate the time
Thank
today.
you for having me.
Thank you.